Unit 20 Redefinition of Conflict Resolution. Structure 20.0 Learning Outcome 20.1 Introduction 20.2 Changing Nature of Conflict 20.3 Conflict Resolution at the Micro Level 20.3.1 Conflict Resolution at Intra-Organizational Level 20.3.2 Inter-Organizational Conflict Resolution 20.4 Conflict Management at the Macro Level 20.5 Conclusion 20.6 Key Concepts 20.7 References and further reading 20.8 Activities 20.0 Learning Outcome. After reading this unit, you will be able to analyze the significance of conflict resolution, understand how conflict is used by groups as a strategy to bring about desired changes in the organization, discuss the methods of conflict resolution between the organizations, and highlight the fact that organizations may use conflict as an opportunity for systemic changes. 20.1 Introduction. The aim of theoretical analysis of conflict is to develop an understanding of the variables, processes, strategies, and techniques that interact to form the basis of conflict resolution. These enable us to analyze, understand, explain, and predict the nature of conflict, and the mechanisms that contribute to its resolution. Behavioral movement has focused on the significance of human relations in the organizations. An organization is a system of consciously coordinated activities of two or more persons. Barnard, 1938, thus faces the challenge of maintaining equilibrium between divergent personnel needs and organizational goals. This situation has the potential to create conflict. One definition of conflict is that it occurs when two people try to occupy the same space at the same time. Loomis and Loomis, 1965, have observed conflict as an ever-present process in human relations. Conflicts are often an integral part of social dynamics and the engine of social and political development. Mack, 1969, suggests conflict may define, maintain, and strengthen group boundaries, contributing to the group's distinctiveness and increasing group solidarity and cohesion. He adds, conflict promotes the formation of groups. Conflict also destroys groups, both in the sense of realignments resulting from shifts in the distribution of power, and in the ultimate sense of the extermination of an unsuccessful party to conflict. This one unit will discuss the nature of conflict in organizations as well as their resolution at the micro and macro levels. It will try to examine the fact that the organizations may use conflict as an opportunity for bringing about changes in the system. 20.2 Changing Nature of Conflict. The earlier literature focused on the organizations and, to a limited extent, to the environment of the organizations, mainly because the industrialization process emphasized the efficiency and productivity of enterprises. Conflict at workplace can hamper both, and so it is in everybody's interest that conflict is resolved effectively. However, with the advent of globalization, the impact of transnational decision-making structures is being increasingly felt. New arrangements for regulatory, administrative, and trade policies are evolving for determining terms of exchange. It is not that earlier there have been no such structures. We have had structures like United Nations, UN, or General Agreement on Tariff and Trade, GATT, that have been guiding the international decision-making and have proved to be useful platforms for conflict resolution. However, most of the conflicts have been over political or military issues. But increasing interdependence or linkages between economies and growing concern for issues like environment and human development have expanded the areas of conflict zones as well as of mutual cooperation. The policies are no longer made in isolation. Concerns of international community are reflected in the policy process of any country. For example, the carpet industry in India needs to get a certification from authorities in the form of a mark to be able to export products to European countries, which are concerned about the abolition of child labor. So, if the country is party to a treaty, it will have to incorporate those concerns in its policies, even if they are not in the interests of a particular group or community. Even a country's interests may be affected by a grouping of some other countries. For example, economic considerations have forced countries to form associations like G20, G8, ASEAN, or SAARC, where members have certain privileges over the other non signatory countries. Consequently, interests of one group may be in conflict with the other. At the national level also, divergent needs and aspirations could create conflicts. For example, a dam on Narmada River may have economic benefits associated with it, but environmentalists see a danger to the ecology in such a project, and sociologists espouse the cause of rehabilitation of displaced communities. Thus, there is a potential for conflict everywhere, be it at an organizational level, between the organizations, between the countries, as well as between the center and the states within a particular country. Even at an individual level in the organization, conflict potential cannot be ruled out. Potential for conflict. The conflicts may be on a small or large scale. They may occur within and among groups, communities, or nations. And they may be triggered by ethnic, racial, religious, or economic differences, or arise from differences in values, beliefs, and attitudes regarding issues. The potential for conflict depends on the degree to which needed resources must be shared, the amount of dependence among individuals and groups, and differences over goals. The process leading to conflict is dynamic, because of the constantly changing nature of goals. Schmidt and Cochin, 1972. The pertinent question is, how could these varied concerns be reconciled? To be able to devise any mechanism, we need to understand the dimensions and phases of conflict. 2. The dimensions of conflict. Robinson, 1972, has identified 2 dimensions of conflict. I. Threats or disputes over territory, whether the boundaries of the territory are physical, social, or work boundaries. And E. Threats to values, goals, and policies, as well as to behavior. Ostrom, 1990, has suggested that there should be clearly defined boundaries. Threats to physical boundaries, as he calls them, often involve property disputes or controversy over use of natural resources by different groups. Social territories help in establishing access to certain resources. Community affiliations set limits regarding who can join the group. The boundaries are limited by considerations like religious affiliation or value structure. Often social boundaries exist, even if they are not considered right or justifiable. Work boundaries may create problems when threats to work boundaries arise over job descriptions. Incompatible or unclear lines of work responsibilities can lead to conflict within organizations. Disputes over work territory may also come about in situations where overlapping services and agencies exist. Jurisdictional disputes too have potential for conflict. Groups tend to protect their territories and maintain their boundaries by excluding others, rewarding and/or punishing group members to the extent that they adhere to group norms and defend the territory in question, and by holding ethnocentric beliefs. Mack, 1969, contends that ethnocentrism is an important source of as well as a contributing factor to the continuity of conflict. Conflict can involve threats to values. Such issues as the environmental concerns as seen in granting right to land to tribals in forest areas, international trade agreements as noticed in World Trade Organization, WTO, and the content of public education as alleged insuffranization of education may threaten individuals and groups with different value orientations. Conflict may arise over incompatibility of goals. For example, political parties may differ on how much of the country's budget should be allocated to social sector or defense. Most conflict is the result of incompatibility of goals. However, sometimes the means to attain goals are also questioned. There could be conflict over policies. For example, conservationists are concerned about the degradation of forests and sociologists are concerned over social division if the bill on scheduled tribes, recognition of forest rights, 2005 is passed. At the same time, the Ministry of Tribal Affairs may proclaim that the bill links issue of livelihood to granting of lands to tribals. Threats to behavior, opines Robinson, 1972, when values, policies, and goals are changed, when territories are redefined, one must develop new behavior skills. One recent behavioral change, for instance, involves the emerging role of women in all facets of our society. Phases of conflict. It has been noticed that conflicts have a cyclical repetition of different phases of highs and lows. Understanding these different phases is useful in planning for conflict prevention. Once the course for preventive action has been defined, the knowledge of the phase of conflict in which decision has to be taken has important policy implications. Donald Rothschild and Chandra Lekha Sriram, 2003, have identified 4 phases of conflict. They are: potential conflict phase. In this phase, the conflict is present at a very low level of intensity. Structural factors and underlying causes create division among groups along socioeconomic, cultural, and political lines. Mobilization of collective discontent starts but is not organized at this stage. Preventive action at this point is not risky and has high potential payoffs. 3. Gestation phase. Consolidation of the mobilization is the characteristic of this phase. Intergroup relations are politicized and popular mobilization puts pressure on decision-making elites to address popular discontent. Polarization between groups increase. However, issues are still negotiable. The costs of preventive actions increase but the potential payoffs are still positive. Triggering an escalation. A real or perceived change in the group's economic, social, or political conditions can trigger the escalation of conflict. Inter-elite ties break down and social interactions focus on organized reaction as political exchanges fade. Conflicting parties lose confidence in each other and feel they cannot compromise. Intervention in this phase becomes risky and costly. Post-conflict. In the post-conflict scenario, preventive interventions aim at re-establishing communication channels between the conflicting groups, in order to avoid a new round of conflict. Conflict has no clear trajectories, implying that distinct phases do not follow one another in a precise or linear order. Intervention in the initial stages is less costly and more effective, but parties often lack the information and the incentives to act sooner than later. Now, we can analyze the conflicts and the mechanism for their resolution at different levels. 20.3 Conflict resolution at the micro level. 20.3.1 Conflict resolution at the intra-organizational level. There are 3 basic types of conflict within the organization: task conflict, intergroup conflict, and procedural conflict. Disagreement about the communication order is called task conflict. Group members may disagree about facts or opinions from authorities. Orders may lie outside the zone of acceptance. The interpretation of evidence may be questioned. Barnard, 1938, says that normally, the authority of communication is not denied, as people realize that it is a threat to all individuals who benefit from the organization. But if a system results in inadequate, contradictory, and inept orders, it may create task conflict. The leadership in such cases needs to ensure that the orders are understood by all. It can use various communication methods to ensure this. According to Mary Parker Follett, there are 3 ways of resolving conflicts. I. Domination. It is a victory of one side over the other. The chances are that the conflict will emerge at a later date at the time convenient to the suppressed party. E. Compromise. In this situation, each side loses some and wins some. Though widely accepted, people rarely want to compromise, and the party, which may have an upper hand, may again create the same situations. E. Integration. In this type of situation, neither side sacrifices. This method has some advantages as it leads to emergence of new values. However, integration requires high intelligence and the leadership needs to have a sufficient knowledge base to deal with the conflicts. Sometimes, resource constraints may jeopardize the process. Another potential area for conflict is the intergroup conflict, that deals with the relationships within the organization. Intergroup conflict may be inevitable and must be managed for optimal group maintenance. A six-step process has been described by experts. 4I. Recognition and acknowledgement that conflict exists. E. Analysis of the existing situation. E. Facilitation of communication. IV. Negotiation. V. Provision for necessary adjustments, reinforcements, confirmations. V. Realization of living with conflicts as all conflicts cannot be resolved. Procedural conflict exists when group members disagree about the procedures to be followed in accomplishing the group goal. New procedures may be formulated and a new agenda suggested. Even the group goal may be modified. Procedural conflict, like task conflict, may be productive. Barker et al., 1987. For example, Administrative Reforms Commission in India has dealt with the issues of procedures in the past and suggested many modifications that have been implemented to some extent. 20.3.2 Inter-organizational level conflict resolution. Conflict resolution at the inter-organizational level has two aspects. First is the environment of a particular organization. The other organizations with which it has linkages may have conflict over goals. In the example of scheduled tribes, recognition of forest rights, 2005, while Ministry of Environment and Forests may be concerned about the reduction in the forest cover, the Ministry of Tribal Affairs may be tackling the livelihood issues of the tribals. Incompatible goals thus may create conflict. Moreover, this may give rise to jurisdictional conflicts as well, as the issue would be control over areas given to tribals. The second aspect stems from institutional pluralism. In an effort to reinvent government or effective governance, many service delivery agencies, both public and private, operate in the same domain. They are actually in competition with each other. However, competition and conflict are two different concepts. We need to understand the distinction. Conflict and competition have a common root because in each case, individuals or groups are usually striving toward incompatible goals. The major difference exists in the form of interference that hinders the attainment of the goal. In competition between groups working toward the same goal, the competitors have rules, formal and informal guidelines, that limit what they can do to each other in attempting to reach their goals. In conflict between groups, there are no such norms or rules. 20.4 Conflict management at the macro level. Stratified structures with functional specificity are concomitant with development process. The differing goals of such structures may create a conflicting situation. A glaring example that came up recently can be mentioned to understand the complexities. The decision of Jharkhand governor to install a government was challenged in the Supreme Court of India, which gave certain directions for the trial of strength in the Legislative Assembly of the state. The intervention by court was considered an interference in the assembly affairs by the parliament speaker and the issue was raised to discuss the propriety of court in this matter. Point is that if conflicts of such nature emerge, then who has the authority to intervene in order to safeguard the constitution? Similarly, civil society movement is gaining ground in India. The sector raises various issues concerning citizens at the policy level. Apparently, macro-level conflict management is crucial. Herein, policy-level intervention is required. 5. Policy making is conflict resolution. Nurturing of democracy is the best option for some scholars. Of the range of tools available to conflict resolution practitioners to manage intractable conflicts, none of them is arguably more durable over the long term than the creation and nurturing of democracy. Democracy is promising because the principles, institutions, and rules associated with democratic practice seek to manage inevitable social conflicts in deeply divided and less conflicted societies alike. Policy process itself includes the voicing of interests by interest groups. Thus, democracy as a system of political decision-making is in many ways a system of conflict management in which the outcomes are unknown but the fundamental rules of the game provide a safe arena in which to compete. Though the evidence of effectiveness of democratic institutions is a mixed one as the level of trust is weak, the issues are emotionally strong, the parties are faction-ridden and incoherent, and much is required of outside parties to guarantee a settlement, it has its advantages as mentioned earlier on. Towards proactive conflict resolution. Bolding, 1962, says, the biggest problem in developing the institutions of conflict control is that of catching conflicts young. Conflict situations are frequently allowed to develop to almost unmanageable proportions before anything is done about them, by which time it is often too late to resolve them by peaceable and procedural means. For any system to be effective and efficient in achieving its goals, the people in the system need to have a shared vision of what they are striving to achieve, as well as clear objectives for each team, department, and individual. We also need to create mechanisms for recognizing and resolving conflict amongst people, so that conflict does not become so serious that cooperation is impossible. Mary Parker Follett accorded an important place to the problems of conflict. She advanced the idea of constructive conflict, that conflicts should be regarded as a normal process in any activity of an organization by which socially valuable differences register themselves for the enrichment of all concerned. By implication, they are neither good nor bad and have to be assessed objectively. Only conflicts that turn violent are disruptive and harmful. Proactive conflict management aims at preventing conflicts. This requires certain steps which are mentioned below. Integrated conflict management systems. Attempts should be made to have integrated conflict management systems. Effective integrated conflict management systems share 5 characteristics. These relate to I. Making available options for preventing, identifying, and resolving all types of problems, including non-hierarchical disputes between employees or between managers to all persons in the workplace. E. Fostering a culture that welcomes good faith dissent and encourage resolution of conflict at the lowest level through direct negotiation. E. Providing multiple access points to enable employees to readily identify and access a knowledgeable person whom they trust for advice about the conflict management system. IV. Opening up multiple options to employees to resolve the conflicts, to look for an opportunity to adopt a problem-solving approach, to seek determination and enforcement of rights, or to do both. 6v. Facilitating necessary systemic support and structures that coordinate access to multiple options and promote competence in dealing with conflict throughout the system. Strengthening institutions. Institutions are characterized by formal rules and informal constraints as well as efficacy of their implementation. Clearly defined roles and responsibilities would ensure that they do not step on each other's shoes. Weak institutions have often been blamed for the system's woes, and both policy makers and practitioners tend to avoid the institutional reform agenda. This may not only compromise the conflict management capacities of the institutions but also give rise to conflicts. So, if the legislature does not have effective control over the executive, the latter may escape the scrutiny of its actions. Consequently, the non-performance of service delivery functions may induce discontent among the beneficiaries. Therefore, institutions need to be strengthened, which would also ensure the legitimacy of their actions among the stakeholders. Central coordinating point. Every system has its coordinating points of resolving conflict. The Prime Minister's office is a good example of such a systemic support. In case of a dispute between ministries, it intervenes to resolve the conflict. Joint consultative machinery at the national, regional, or departmental levels is another coordinating point. Based on the Whitley Council of Britain, these resolve conflicts between the government and its employees. The central coordinating point spurs the development and implementation of the system, administers some of its resources, and monitors the implementation. It ensures that the system is responsive to information it produces and also to the changing circumstances. However, it also needs to ensure that costs are allocated in a manner that gives incentives to managers and employees or other stakeholders to deal with conflict early and effectively. System evaluation and monitoring mechanisms. Communication, upward, downward, and horizontal, is the essence of the organization. Feedback loops ensure that there is a connection between conflicts, resolutions, identification of the need for systemic change, and assessment of trends. Harmonious communication requires that each stakeholder knows the entire system and any change that takes place in the system. Evaluation is the key to a system's success, as it informs the organization of the strengths and weaknesses of its design, thereby allowing the opportunity for continual improvement. The coordinating point may ensure adequate communication process for the purpose. Capacity building, changing environment and continued systemic pressure on the organizations requires that stakeholders are capable of coping with the increased demands of the tasks. Meeting the changing expectations of society calls for radical changes in attitudes and behaviors in the public administration systems. A capacity needs enhancement assessment from time to time may enable the managers in taking timely steps toward capacity building of stakeholders. For example, the Ministry of Agriculture, before contemplating a subsidy on any item, needs to be aware of implications of any such subsidy in World Trade Organization, WTO. People's participation. Some experts argue that conflict may stimulate participation in the decision-making process but provide only a temporary stimulus and prevent the 7. Development of a permanent foundation for participation. Many individuals who find conflict distasteful may be repelled. However, people's participation may be used to deal with conflict situations more effectively when they arise. One indicator of participation is the extent of decentralization. Decentralization not only deepens the democracy, it also facilitates the people to get their voices included in the policy process, which in the longer run would result in support of communities in identifying and resolving conflicts. Civil society organizations. There are thousands of civil society organizations, CSOs, throughout the world at the global, regional, and national levels. These CSOs include NGOs, trade unions, faith-based organizations, self-help groups, indigenous peoples movements, and foundations. As we have read in our previous unit, they have emerged as a strong force in recent times. For example, it was at the instance of CSOs, both Indian and global, that Gujarat Chief Minister Mr. Narendra Modi was denied visa for a visit to the USA, as he was thought to be a perpetrator of genocide of members of a particular community. Similarly, there are many examples of active partnerships of CSOs in the areas of forest conservation, AIDS vaccines, rural poverty, microcredit, and other aspects of development. They are now important stakeholders and have the potential to create or resolve conflicts. Their inclusion in the policy process not only strengthens the institutions, but also enables community participation, as they have great capacity to mobilize people on various issues. International organizations. International conflict management is a dynamic interdisciplinary field, constantly evolving as a response to problems in international relations. Theoretically located between social and behavioral science, it is the point at which these perspectives meet and sometimes clash. Conflicts in the international arena are no longer confined to problems of violence. Socioeconomic and environmental concerns have occupied the center stage. However, realizing the significance and potential of conflicts to disrupt the process, conflict resolution mechanisms are now an integral part of the arrangements being put into place. Several multilateral environmental agreements, MEAs, have been signed by various countries. These have not been built under one international organization, but are scattered over many organizations and agreements. Several of them restrict trade in various items. For example, Montreal Protocol restricts trade in ozone-depleting substances, ODS. At the same time, WTO facilitates trade and makes it contingent upon members to grant most favored nation status to each other except under circumstances agreed to by all the parties. Problem arises when a country, which has not signed the Montreal Protocol, wants to sell ODS to a party member to the protocol. Denial by the other party may infringe upon the exporting country's right and it may go to the Dispute Settlement Committee of WTO. Potential of such conflicts forced the WTO Secretariat to set up a separate committee to resolve the matter. Again, increasing globalization has expanded the scope of activities of multinational corporations, MNCs. They have bases in many countries. Often the interests of a company may come in conflict with the country where it has a base. For example, Dabhol Power Corporation had set up a power plant in Maharashtra, but failure of its operations created conflict among the three stakeholders: Enron Company, Maharashtra state government, and the central government. Finally, arbitration is being resorted to solve the matter. So, we find that there are three major mechanisms that help resolve the conflicts. 8. Negotiation. This is the process where mandated representatives of groups in a conflict situation meet together in order to resolve their differences and to reach an agreement. It is a deliberate process, conducted by representatives of groups, designed to reconcile differences and to reach agreements by consensus. The outcome is often dependent on the power relationship between the groups. Mediation. When negotiations fail or get stuck, parties often call in an independent mediator. This person or group tries to facilitate settlement of the conflict. The mediator plays an active part in the process, advises both or all groups, acts as an intermediary, and suggests possible solutions. However, mediators act only in an advisory capacity. They have no decision-making powers and cannot impose a settlement on the conflicting parties. Arbitration. It means the appointment of an independent person to act as an adjudicator, or judge, in a dispute and to decide on the terms of a settlement. Both parties in a conflict have to agree about who the arbitrator should be, and that the decision of the arbitrator will be binding on them. Arbitration differs from mediation and negotiation in that it does not promote the continuation of collective bargaining. The arbitrator listens to and investigates the demands and counter-demands and takes over the role of decision maker. People or organizations can agree on having either a single arbitrator or a panel of arbitrators. There are organizations established by international treaties between or among national governments. United Nations, UN, World Health Organization, WHO, International Court of Justice etc. Are international organizations, and the signatory countries are bound by the rules and regulations of these organizations. They help in resolving conflicts between the countries. So, if a country feels that its interests are threatened by some actions of another country, it resorts to conflict resolution mechanism created under these organizations. We have also often heard of the phrase, global village, that refers country to increasing interdependence of societies and economies. Several companies have simultaneous presence in many countries. Many times, these private companies enter into an agreement with the sovereign country. In case of conflict of interests, they resort to agreed conflict resolution mechanism. In such a situation, decision-making or the policy process in a country is influenced by such treaties or agreements. The state needs to ensure that conflicting policies are not formulated in order to avoid situations that demand conflict resolution. But if they are, then a systematic conflict resolution provision has to be there. 20.5 Conclusion. Thus, we can conclude that conflict is bound to occur in any situation or place where interests or goals collide. Conflict resolution has to be an integral part of any organization, agency, and government. Conflict could have positive as well as negative consequences. Ranging from micro to macro levels, conflict resolution is managed in a systematic and legal manner. Conflict can also be used as a strategy in social change. Narmada Bachao Andolan used conflict as a strategy to achieve its goals and change the existing conditions. It did not avoid conflict. Through the conflict, the people associated with the movement wanted those in charge at the higher level in the power structure to address their problem. In order to effectively approach such situations, it is necessary to understand how conflict can be used as a strategy in 9. Social change. One of the necessary tools in conflict management is an awareness and understanding of the strategies that agitators use in generating conflict. Often the basic strategy of the agitators is to organize community and neighborhood groups to establish a creative tension within the establishment. Robinson and Clifford, 1974. Whether the tension is creative or not, tension is frequently created. The tactics may range from Gandhian method of non-cooperation to protests, boycotts or sit-ins or even violence. Properly managed, conflict can be associated with a range of positive effects. It can cause problems to surface and be dealt with in a group, clarify varying points of view, stimulate and energize individuals, motivate the search for creative alternatives, provide vivid feedback, create increased understanding of one's conflict style and extend the capacities of group members, and provide a mechanism for adjusting relationships in terms of current realities. There are many possible negative results that emanate from conflict, including reduced cooperation, trust, and motivation. As Parker, 1974, notes, conflict not managed will bring about delays, disinterest, lack of action and, in extreme cases, a complete breakdown of the group. Unmanaged conflict may result in withdrawal of individuals and an unwillingness on their part to participate in other groups or assist with various group action programs. The goal of conflict management, then, is to increase the positive results, while reducing the negative ones. This unit discussed the major issues involved in conflict resolution. 20.6 Key Concepts. ASEAN. The Association of Southeast Asian Nations or ASEAN was established on the 8th of August 1967 in Bangkok by 5 original member countries, Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, Singapore and Thailand. The ASEAN Declaration states that the aims and purposes of the association are I. To accelerate the economic growth, social progress and cultural development in the region through joint endeavors in the spirit of equality and partnership in order to strengthen the foundation for a prosperous and peaceful community of Southeast Asian nations. And E. To promote regional peace and stability through abiding respect for justice and the rule of law in the relationship among countries in the region and adherence to the principles of the UN Charter. The Treaty of Amity and Cooperation, TAC, in Southeast Asia, signed at the First ASEAN Summit in 1976 declared that in their relations with one another, the high contracting parties should be guided by certain fundamental principles which include mutual respect, non-interference in settlement of differences over the internal matters of a particular country, and effective cooperation. Creative tension. It is the tension that comes through the predictable stage in the creative process. These stages are preparation for identifying a problem, concerted effort to use resources, frustration if no solution is found, withdrawal, putting aside the problem, insight, emanating from a spontaneous moment in work and follow through, implementing ideas into action. Creative tension craves resolution. The essence of increased productivity in life is to learn how to generate and sustain creative tension in your workday and not tension stress. Enhancement of creative tension would include steps such as setting aside home for the hardest work, permitting your thoughts to be chaotic, taking short break for ideas to flow, and implementing ideas instantly. 10. Carla Brandau, Tension, Stress or Creative Tension. New breakthroughs in personal productivity, http://www. Sensible Software.com, articles, A.W. Turn for Results. Com Group of 8 G8. It is considered to be the global public making body at the highest level. The G8 includes the group of 7 countries along with Russia. The other countries include Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, the United Kingdom, and the United States. The representatives from these countries meet to discuss economic issues and other international and monetary matters. Group of 20 Forum G20. This is a bloc of developing nations which came into being at the 5th Ministerial WTO conference held in Mexico in September 2003. This includes finance ministers or central bankers from Argentina, Australia, Brazil, Canada, China, France, Germany, India, Indonesia, Italy, Japan, Mexico, Russia, Saudi Arabia, South Asia, South Korea, Turkey, UK and US along with representatives of the IMF, European Union and World Bank. This group attempts to discuss and negotiate on key economic and financial policies issues among these economies and promote cooperation to achieve sustainable economic growth at the global level. Montreal Protocol. It is an international agreement to drastically reduce the production of chlorofluorocarbons. The protocol was adopted in Montreal in 1987 and amended in 1992 in Copenhagen. It governs stratospheric ozone protection and research and production of ozone-deleting substances. EU Glossary. GSFC. NASA. Gov. Library, Glossary. FUP3 Ozone-depleting substances, ODS, depletion of ozone has become a major concern for the environmentalists. As per the Wikipedia, ozone depletion refers to the phenomenon of reduction in the amount of ozone in the stratosphere. Since the ozone layer prevents most harmful wavelengths of ultraviolet light from passing through the Earth's atmosphere, observed and projected decreases in ozone have generated a worldwide concern. Ozone-depleting chemicals called the chlorofluorocarbons have been banned by the Montreal Protocol. Spoils system. The ancestral home of the spoils system was the USA. Its essence was to make the public officers the spoils for the party winning at the polls. When a new party came to power, it dismissed all the employees appointed by its predecessor and filled the vacancies with its own supporters. MP. Sharma and B.L. Sadana, 1998, 37th ed., Public Administration in Theory and Practice, Kitab Mahal, Allahabad, SARC. It is the South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation, established on December 8, 1985. It is an association of 7 countries of South Asia, namely Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, Maldives, Nepal, Pakistan and Sri Lanka. The goal of the SARC is to promote economic, technical and cultural cooperation between its member countries and provide a forum for the discussion of South Asia's political problems. 11 Whitley Councils. These were first created in 1917 in the industrial field as a result of the recommendation of a committee presided over by Mr. Whitley, the then Speaker of House of Commons, as a grievance redressal mechanism. In 1919, the scheme was approved by Civil Services also. The Whitley organization in the civil service consists of a national council, department councils, district office or work committees. The government representatives are from the officer class, while the staff representatives are from the among government representatives and the vice chairman is from the staff. The object of Whitley Council are to I. Provide machinery for the ventilation and discussion of governance as to the conditions of service. E. Determine general principles regarding the same. E. Utilize the ideas and experience of staff for improvement in office machinery and organization. IV. Encourage further education of the staff. And V. Secure greatest possible measure of cooperation between the state as employer and general body of civil servants. Source: M. P. Sharma and Sadana, 1997, Op. Cit. Zone of acceptance. This concept has been coined by Herbert Simon. According to him, an order given by a superior to a subordinate is accepted due to 4 basic factors of motivation in addition to the authority exercised by the superior. These include a. Rewards and sanctions. B. Legitimacy. C. Social approval. D. Subordinates' confidence in the superior's ability. An order given by a superior, accompanied by any of the above 4 factors, is said to be accepted by the subordinates. 20.7 References and further reading. Barker, Larry L., Kathy J. Wallace, Kitty W. Watson, Robert J. Kibler, 1987, 3rd edition, Groups in Process. An Introduction to Small Group Communication, Prentice Hall, New Jersey. Barnard, C.I., 1938, The Functions of the Executive, Harvard University Press, Massachusetts. Boulding, Kenneth A., 1962, Conflict and Defense, A General Theory, Harper & Row Publishers, New York. Follett, Mary Parker, 1924, Creative Experience, Longmans Green, New York. Lekha Sriram, 2003, Third-Party Incentives and the Phases of Conflict Prevention, in Chandra Lekha Sriram and Karen Vermester, eds. From Promise to Practice, Strengthening UN capacities for the prevention of violent conflict, Lynn Rihanna, Boulder. Loomis, Charles P. and Zona K. Loomis, 1965, Modern Social Theories, D. Van Nostrand Company Inc. Princeton. 1213. Mack, Raymond W. 1969, The Components of Social Conflict, in Ralph M. Kramer and Harry Specht, eds. Readings in Community Organization Practice, Prentice Hall, New Jersey. Ostrom, A. 1990, Governing the Commons, Cambridge University Press, Cambridge. Parker, John, 1974, Some Ideas About Working with People Individually and in Groups, Ohio Cooperative Extension Service, Ohio. Robinson, Jerry W. Jr., 1972, The Management of Conflict, Journal of the Community Development Society, Vol. 3, No. 2. Robinson, Jerry W. Jr. and Roy A. Clifford, 1974, Conflict Management in Community Groups, North Central Regional Extension Publication, University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, No. 36-5 Rothschild, Donald and Chandra Lekha Sriram, 2003, Third-Party Incentives and the Phases of Conflict Prevention, in Chandra Lekha Sriram and Karen Vermester, eds. Op. Cit. Schmidt, Stuart M. and Thomas A. Cochin, 1972, Conflict, Toward Conceptual Clarity, Administrative Science Quarterly. Sisk, Timothy D., et al. 2001, Democracy at the Local Level. The International IDEA Handbook on Participation, Representation, Conflict Management and Governance, International IDEA, Stockholm. 20.8 Activities. 1. Attempt penning down a case study on conflict resolution involving multilateral environmental agreements or WTO agreements or UN policy resolution about which you have read recently. 2. How would you proceed if you are in the middle management cadre and your subordinates refuse to accept one of your orders? You can conjure up any conflict-ridden scenario.